I'm Peter Schwartz with Salesforce.com, and I want to welcome you to the first of a series of conversations with people whose ideas are shaping the future. Today, we're here with Chris Anderson, but I want to make this a conversation that's as wide as possible. So we've got some folks over here on Google Hangouts, and they'll be joining us with questions and comments as we go along. And over here's my colleague Pablo Quintanilla, and he'll be taking your social media comments and email comments and feeding them to us as we go along. So if you've got some questions, if you've got some comments, please participate in the conversation. So let me introduce my guest today, and this is Chris Anderson. Now, full disclosure, Chris is also one of my closest friends, and he regularly beats me at tennis almost every Saturday morning. That's how we spend our Saturdays. But Chris has a very storied career, first with The Economist, then 10 years as editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, author of a number of books. We're going to talk about his latest book, Makers, in particular, but author of Free and The Long Tail, which everybody read and had a huge impact. And now the CEO of a remarkable new little company called 3D Robotics, and we'll get into what that's all about as we move forward. But those are the big things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Makers. We're going to talk about 3D robotics as an example of Makers. And then we're going to take a kind of long view of technology and what it's been like to be part of Wired magazine over the last decade. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Peter.
Makers. Okay, this is a really big idea. You know, it's changing the world. President Obama talked about it in his State of the Union address. There's a transformation in manufacturing happening. Tell us about it.
So the maker movement, which my book is about, and is about 5 years old, I would argue, is the web generation meets the real world. It's what happens when we take the 20 years we've been doing online of coming up with a new way of innovating, new way of working together. Everything that we know so well in your company today is built on, and then applying this not just to bits, but to making physical stuff. You know, when you take that, the social models, the communities, the collaboration models that we've established, and you start to take them off screens and into manufacturing and the physical world, you have a multiplier effect. And, manufacturing is one of the biggest industries in the world. It's waiting to be transformed. I think the maker movement could be the way it happens. This week is Maker Faire. Maker Faire is sort of the biggest of the annual gatherings. Probably be about 120,000 people in San Mateo. Run by the Make magazine, which is sort of the Bible of the movement. And it's going to be a fascinating example where the workshops and the garages of the Bay Area and around open up, and you see how much is going on in this sort of grassroots innovation. 'Twas ever thus. We've always had tinkerers and hobbyists, but what's different is that they're now working together online with digital designs, using digital fabrication tools, desktop manufacturing tools like 3D printers and laser cutters, and then tapping into cloud manufacturing so they can go from idea to prototype to company in a matter of just a few years, creating what's essentially a bottoms-up manufacturing industry like we've never seen before.
Well, you mentioned some of the tools. People are already beginning to think about 3D printers and so on. I've seen the 3D printer in your basement and watched you make parts. But is that really the innovation here, or is there something more than that?
The innovation is simply digital. Anything digital touch is almost always transformed. In this case, it's not just digital manufacturing. We've actually had that for 20 years. 3D printers are not new. What is new is that these tools, 3D printers, laser cutters, CNC machines, CAD software, all that kind of stuff, were industrial tools for factories for the last 20 years. We're now introducing words like personal and desktop. And the moment you democratize, the moment you take industrial technology and make it personal, then you tap into a social revolution. The personal computer was not the best computer or the first computer. It was perhaps the worst computer of its day. But because it was personal and was used by a new class of users who had a new class of ideas, it became transformative. And that's what's happening right now with manufacturing. The 3D printer in my basement is not by itself transformative, but the generations growing up with 3D printers in their basement are going to be the ones who invent a new class of products, a new class of manufacturing that will ultimately be an industrial revolution.
Well, now you've been going to the Maker Faire for many, many, many years. Okay, so what do you see? It started out with a few hundred people, then a few thousand people, and as you said, it's going to be 120,000 people there tomorrow. What's been happening? What do you see happening at the fair?
I think it started by just, again, sort of opening the garage doors and sort of saying, whoa, look at all these cool things that people were working on. And initially, I think it was largely kind of the web as a place to talk about what you were doing. And then people, they'd post like, discussion boards and pictures and videos and such. But then as they became more sophisticated, they started sharing design files. And it became like an open source project. And they were now building on each other's work and going from kind of parallel reinvention of the wheel to incrementally, collectively building something that nobody could build on their own. Then the tools of advanced digital manufacturing started to propagate. And those 3D printers that we've read about became something you could buy. And then you saw the makers starting to use these more sophisticated tools. And then it became entrepreneurship. And you saw those makers start to create companies, and then those companies got bigger. And they started, again, sort of collaboratively building companies based on these tools, but going from kind of, garage to, multi-million-dollar, sales in a few years, building their own factories, things that would not have been possible 5, 10 years ago.
So you mentioned laser cutters. I mean, is that one of the key, kind of physical tools in this process?
Yeah, I mean, so there's, so the digital manufacturing, starts with prototyping tools, and these are the things that you have on your desktop today. The 3D printer is the easiest to imagine. It's basically like the 2D printer you have, the inkjet you already have, but rather than laying down one layer of ink, it lays down multiple layers of initially plastic. And rather than getting a piece of paper out, you get a thing out. And so anything you can imagine, you can print, but kind of low resolution, one color plastic. But it's getting better fast. Soon higher resolution, faster, multiple colors, multiple materials. Now you can not only do it on your desktop, you can send it to a service in the cloud like Shapeways and have it made in titanium or stainless steel or silver. And the tools, the CAD tools, computer-aided design, is sort of the word processor, if you will, of this, which were incredibly difficult today, are now free and easy to use. And you can download apps for your phone. 123D Design from Autodesk, you could download for free on your phone. You can start to, we're closing at the moment where, you remember Apple's slogan from the beginning of the iPod, rip, mix, burn. That concept, take a commercial product, take it into your own computer, change it, and then reproduce it, manufacture it yourself with your own CDs. That spirit changed the music industry. Now the motto is rip, mod, make. You can, with your phone, scan something, just use the camera, take pictures, send it to the cloud, comes down, back down as a design file in polygons in 3D. You can then change it, again, on your phone or your iPad, and modify it or invent something new, and then you can make it. You can press a button and it appears in physical form. That's as close to magic as almost anything we've seen, and it's not only available to everybody, but it's increasingly free.
So I want to explore what the really big implications of this are. But okay, so we've got the tools for actually making stuff. We're now getting things like AutoCAD for the masses. We're in the building where Autodesk is located, so not surprising. And you're now talking about an entrepreneurial revolution as well. So is this actually going to transform the economy? I mean, am I going to download my iPhone one day, and instead of it being manufactured in China, it's going to be manufactured in my basement or in the neighborhood? Or, how is this going to change the structure of the economy?
I think the web is a great analogy. I mean, if I was telling you today that there's this cool desktop thing and it's going to change the world, you would rightly be skeptical were it not for the fact that we've done it twice already. We did it once with a personal computer and once again with the web. Let's just take the web as an example. The web democratized publishing and broadcasting. So publishing and broadcasting, it used to be to publish, you needed to own a factory called a printing plant. And a printing plant is a factory. I mean, unionized workers, big machines, multi-blocks. And broadcasting required a different kind of factory, which was radio towers and television studios and things like that. And then the web turned publish into a button in the browser. I mean, it's just every time, and I'm sure most of the audience here has clicked a button that says publish. Right. And to think that something that used to be an industrial task that required access to a factory has become a button in a browser is, I mean, it's no big deal. We do it every day, and yet it changed the world. So what the web did to media, which is to say it didn't kill media, but it created a competition. a very different kind of media, mass amateurism, grassroots, micro, niche, long tail, and all that. YouTube didn't kill Hollywood, but YouTube created an alternative to Hollywood, a new form of content that Hollywood itself would not have created. And I think what we have now with manufacturing is the opportunity to do the same thing. The maker movement is not going to kill mass production, but we'll create an alternative to mass production where we will see the long tail of things. All those marketplaces of 10,000 that are too big for the individual and too small for mass production can now exist. And if history is any guide, the great ideas of tomorrow will come from the markets of 10,000 today.
All right. So it's not going to put Ford out of business or BMW. I'm still going to buy my car, and if I need to buy steel, I'm probably going to buy it from a big steel company. But I could easily imagine, of course, all those highly personalized electronics products, physical products around the home, toys, sporting goods. Yes, it's a good example. Why don't you?
So I'm wearing my Pebble smartwatch.
Right.
The Pebble smartwatch is famous as one of the most successful Kickstarter projects, raised more than $10 million. What I love about the Pebble smartwatch is not just that it's a really cool watch, it's kind of a glanceable display on my phone, but that it was released on Kickstarter on the same day that Sony released their smartwatch. Now, I'm going to make a bet that many in the audience out there have heard of the Pebble smartwatch, but have not heard of the Sony smartwatch. And what I love about this is that it's basically 4 kids in Palo Alto who put a project on Kickstarter. It took off and created basically a category. Now smartwatches are something that Apple's thinking about getting into. So this is possible because the electronics are now accessible, the sensors are available, that the ability to go from a prototype into production, taking advantage of cloud manufacturing and increasingly accessible outsourcing services is something that anybody can do. And we have a crowdfunding model with Kickstarter that meant they didn't have to. As a matter of fact, I think they were actually rejected by venture capitalists.
I'm sure.
But they didn't need VC because they had an alternative model where the customers could pre-order the product and create not only market research and community, but the funding that institutions traditionally would not provide.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you said it's a new category. VCs rarely fund new categories. That's a big leap. So I want to talk about your new company as an example of what we're talking about. But let's see, first of all, if there are any comments over here from Google Hangouts.
Oh, hi, my name's Aaron. I was wondering if you could give an example of a technology that's underestimated right now, and perhaps one where we're too overzealous.
So just in case you couldn't hear all of that because it was rather soft, we were asking the question, what technology are we overestimating and what are we underestimating out there? What's going to surprise us on the upside and what's going to surprise us on the downside? What do you think, Chris?
On the upside, I think my other wrist comes into play. This is just a Nike fuel band, but it's an example.
You're walking marketing here.
I am, and I wish I sold both these products or made both of them, but I don't. I'm just a consumer. But this is an example of what's called the quantified self movement or personalized health. And basically, both of these are. I'm going to pull out my third prop of the day, which is my phone. The smartphone revolution is creating not only an extraordinary supercomputers in our pockets and the internet with us, but also the components inside these phones, the MEM sensors, which is the gyros and accelerometers and barrows, the GPS, the camera, the ARM processors, the screens, the batteries, the wireless, all that stuff. Those components now being made at these are Apple and Samsung's and LG's economies of scale is creating a Moore's law of devices. The Moore's law of sensors, Moore's law of sort of incredibly powerful processors on a very tiny level. And these components now are going to change industries outside of the phone itself. It's the Internet of Things. But more to the point, what the most exciting thing about the Internet of Things is the Internet of me. Right. This is, those smartphone components allow these devices to exist. This is just monitoring my activity. Of course. But today all it has is accelerometers that measures movement. But tomorrow, it's basically going to be a tricoder. It's going to measure, my blood sugar levels and my pulse and, my blood pressure, my chemical effluent levels, all that kind of stuff, and correlate it to my actions, my location, who's around me. So if I find
if I make you allergic, it's going to show up there.
If my pulse goes up every time I'm around Peter Schwartz, that's probably actionable information somewhere or another. But what's exciting about this is big data.
Yeah.
Right. This is big data about me. And I'm generating what's called the data exhaust. I'm generating a huge amount of data which we're not capturing, mostly because we haven't had the sensors all around us, and we didn't have the analytical tools to do anything useful with it. Today, we're starting to get the sensors, but we still don't really have the analytical tools to do something about it. But once we do, and we can combine it with other people's data and start to do this kind of bottoms-up clinical trial, and at this point, we get ultimately personalized medicine. I don't care what the general advice for middle-aged men is. I want to know about the specific advice to me, based on my biology, my lifestyle, my needs. These are the devices that are going to do that. And I think that people right now are kind of, saying, well, steps, I suppose that's good, but this is just a tiny glimpse of what ultimately could be a revolution in healthcare.
I think it's a great example of seeing something early on. I mean, clearly, what you're getting now by way of data is very, very limited. But first of all, when you get data, when it becomes much more sophisticated in terms of its sensors, as well as you now start correlating with lots of other people, and you begin to get an enormous, you said big data not only about you, but about a much larger group of people. You're seeing where you fit in that context, and so on. So I think, okay, so that's the one which we may be underestimating, maybe bigger deal. What is it we're overestimating?
That's a trickier one, because I'm trying to think, who do I slap at this point? What are we overestimating? I mean, usually we get things wrong in time, not direction. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, for example, we got overexcited about nanotechnology, but
that's a good example.
But we, I think we got overexcited about certain energy technologies, and you're probably there. I mean, I'm super excited about things like autonomous cars. I'm probably off by a decade in terms of adoption rates, et cetera. So, I think that the Internet of Things is something I've been a little bit. I've been wrestling with it because I've got every Internet of Things device, and the only ones I can think of any useful application are the ones that are attached to me. I think I'm actually less interested in the Internet of Things as I am the Internet of me, and so perhaps that's something that that requires a little more focus.
Thanks. Now, yeah, I mean, the truth is that a lot of the kind of revolution we're talking about is also, frankly, what we're doing here at Salesforce in terms of enabling individuals and using that kind of peer power that we're talking about. But, in fact, let's hear from Pablo on what we're getting online.
Terrific, Peter. I should remind our audience that I'm taking questions. I'm sourcing questions on our great tool, Radiant 6. You should send us any question at #Salesforce Live. And here's one question for Chris, and that is, Chris, give us a picture of an aspirational future in which technology flourishes and the economy follows.
Well, I think that's the world we're living in. At the moment, I mean, my history is one of basically, I was in the science world, in the physics world, and we were using the internet, and it was like, yeah, sure, this is how we, scientific laboratories communicate with each other. And then this magazine, Wired, came out, and it said, no, the internet is not a scientific communications tool. It is it's a social force. It's going to change the world, destroy the nation state. It was, it saw it inside the broadest cultural and economic context, and the reason I think Wired in 1993 was so excited about this is because there's a long tradition of of what happens when you give regular people powerful tools. And the history of technology is less about the technology and more about who's using it. Every time we give regular people powerful tools, even if they're less powerful than the tools that the elite had, they end up doing extraordinary things. And so I think democratization is the most powerful force in technology. And what I love about all these devices out here is that they were starting to put the word personal in front of virtually everything. And companies are great, but people are greater. And when things get cheaper, easier, and ubiquitous, those social forces kick in. So I think that we are 10 minutes into the day of the sort of century-long democratization force. We democratized politics, and that's called democracy. We democratized commerce, and that's called capitalism. We're now democratizing technology, and we're just beginning to see what that's going to do.
I mean, we had a great statistic come out in the last week in terms of television viewership of broadcast television, of the old model. And if you'd said a decade ago that YouTube would be launching commercial channels on the week that, in fact, ABC, NBC, and CBS would be saying, viewership has never been more down, and individually, the people would want to watch the kind of programming that gets uploaded every single second on YouTube, and that people can now create commercial channels and produce and so on. When you think about, for example, you know my son Ben, I have no trouble imagining him being a television producer in this view, but it's not, for ABC, it is the channel of me. It's what I have to say and what's interesting.
We're doing television right now.
Yep. So that game has changed in a rather fundamental way, and I think the kind of tipping point was literally this week. Those two events was the democratization of media. It was rather profound. Okay, let's move on. We've talked about this democratization. We've talked about the manufacturing revolution, but you're living it, okay? So you left Wired magazine, and we'll come back to that story in a little bit, but you've now the CEO of a company. I know you've been dabbling at it for a number of years, building little drones and so on with your 3D printer and other things and kits, but now you've really gone into business with a company called 3D Robotics. So before we get into drones and robots and all that, tell us more about the kind of how you move from being a publisher to a manufacturer as a perfect example of what you are talking about.
My story, like is so often, and I find in my experience, begins with a failed exercise in parenting. I've got 5 kids. I am constantly trying to get them interested in science and technology, and consistently failing. Now, I'm not giving up though, and so what I'm constantly, I try to find is things that will excite them about technology in the same way I'm excited, and so I kind of come up with projects. And 5 years ago, I thought I had the best weekend ever planned. I was at Wired. We got these products in for review, and the new Lego Mindstorms Robotics kit was coming in, and I was like, okay, Saturday we're going to build robots with the kids. Lego, what could go wrong? And then this remote control airplane came in. I thought on Sunday we'll fly a plane in the park, So Saturday we sort of the kids dutifully, assembled the Tribot, this little 3-wheeled robot, and then program it. It takes all morning. And when we were done, and we said press go, it did what it was supposed to do, which is sort of slowly roll up to a wall and then back away. And the kids are like, "You're kidding." Right. We've seen Transformers, right?
Right.
Where are the lasers? Where are, why is it not destroying this house? And it's very hard to compete with Hollywood, by the way. Real robotics versus CG, CG wins every time. So that was kind of a bust. But I said, okay, on Sunday we'll fly a plane, and it went straight into a tree, and they're like, once again, Dad, your Geek Dad projects have failed us. And I thought, what would be more interesting? What would have been more interesting than a 3-wheeled robot that bounces away from a wall? I thought, well, what if the Lego had flown the plane? That would have been cool, and it would have done a better job than me. And so I said, kid, let's design a Lego autopilot. And I literally had to Google autopilot. What is an autopilot? How does it work? And I said, but I was so impressed by the Lego because they had these little plastic sensors. It had a plastic gyroscope and a plastic accelerometer and a plastic compass. And I was like, who knew that these sensors were so cheap and easy to use? And so we built it. And we built a Lego drone. And it's now in the Lego Museum in Billund, Denmark, which I'm very proud of. And it kind of almost flew.
That's historic. I mean, every Lego freak in the world, that would be a really big deal.
It was, 5 years ago, it was a big deal. Now I think it's been done by many people. But it was kind of so. At that point, I got chills. Right? It is drones and autopilots. This used to be military-industrial technology. I mean, they're actually regulated as cruise missile controllers and export controlled, on the notion that only defense contractors could build autopilots. And my children and I had just done it with Lego. Now, when that happens, something in the world has changed. Now, later on, I discovered it was because the smartphones had made these components available cheaply and easily, and today you can buy them in Radio Shack. But I just sort of whoa, it should not be possible for me to Google autopilot and build something on the table with the kids. The kids lost interest. I went down the rabbit hole and said, I want to see what's going on here. This is just freaky. So I created a website called DIY Drones to follow my tradition of sort of being stupid in public. When I'm ignorant in public, 2 wonderful things happen. Number 1, people help make me smarter. They answer my questions and correct me. And 2, it liberates other people to be, to ask dumb questions in public. And it turns out that in any complex new field like this, everybody's ignorant about some element.
That's a great social example of essentially crowdsourcing your ignorance, as it were.
Crowdsourcing your ignorance and sort of collectively recognizing you may be expert on analog electronics, but he's expert in digital electronics, and she's expert in aerodynamics. aerodynamics, and this other guy does software, and this other guy does manufacturing. Everybody brought something to the table, and collectively, we found ourselves building what was essentially a crowdsourced aerospace company, but it wasn't a company yet. Everyone's like, okay, here we've developed the technology, we've done sort of what Boeing would take 10 years and $10 million to do, we've just sort of essentially done in a matter of months for free, but it's not, you can't buy it. And it said, well, we'll have to start a company. So one of the guys, a guy named Jordi Munoz, posted this cool YouTube video of him flying a helicopter with a Wii controller. I said, Jordi, you seem brilliant, let's start a company. And he said, okay. I said, tell me something about yourself. And it turns out that he had been, I think at that point he was 21 years old, just left Tijuana, Mexico, never been to college. Today, in 3 years, he and his team and the people we hired built, a now multi-million-dollar aerospace company. And it is the fact that that 20-somethings can go on eBay and buy pick-and-place machines and build a factory is just extraordinary. The world has changed. This was not possible 10 years ago. Today, we have what amounts to an aerospace company 3 years after I was playing with Lego on the table with my kids, all because we've harnessed these new tools of the web, open source, collaboration, community, and these extraordinary technologies that are now available for pennies.
And so now I can buy one of your drones?
We sell more drones. We sell like $10,000 drones a year. To give you a point of reference, the entire U.S. military fleet of drones is 7,500. So we sell more drones every year than the entire U.S. military fleet. Now ours cost like $600, and they're small, and they're only for peaceful purposes. We don't sell to the military. They're not weaponized. They're basically GoPro cameras. They're used for things like agriculture and Hollywood and following. There's great functions where it can just sort of follow you around as you're windsurfing and you get that great sort of action sports angle, and lots of fun. Increasingly easy to use, increasingly robust and reliable and accessible and all that. But the point is it's yet another industrial technology that we're putting the word personal in front of.
So Pablo's got a question.
A great question just came in, Peter and Chris. Shamrocked is saying, Chris Anderson left the publication to found this new company, one of hundreds that have sprung up in recent years, and it is generating drones in all shapes and sizes. The sky, Anderson said recently, and a bit ominously, could be dark with these things. And the implication is, what did you mean by that?
So not dark everywhere. The point is that if you got a Moore's law effect, you're basically seeing stuff that used to be expensive becoming so cheap that you can start to just waste them. So, like, take the word disposable. Boeing and Lockheed Martin, as great as they are not going to create disposable drones. Part because their main customer, the government, isn't asking for them. But Moore's law is making that possible. And disposable meaning, what if a drone costs $10? What if it were this big? Silicon Valley is all about wasting technology. We waste transistors, we waste bandwidth, we waste storage. I mean, when something becomes too cheap to meter, you should stop metering it. And we think that drones are going to be essentially too cheap to meter, that the technology is going to be such that they can be small and light. Now, where would the sky be dark? Why would the sky be dark? We think agriculture is actually the most interesting application. Agriculture is a big data problem without the big data. Farms have gotten so big and there's so few people working on it that you basically don't know what's going on in there in the farm. And so, to give you one simple example, farmers spray fungicide on farms before they have a fungal infection because the cost of missing a fungal infection is so high. So what if, rather than spraying lots of chemicals on a crop in case you have an outbreak, what if you had a daily crop survey that said, no fungal infection today, no need to spray? Or, oops, overnight there was a little infection here, why don't you just spray there? We would save a huge amount of money, increase productivity, and really lower the chemical load in our food and in our environment.
We call that precision agriculture.
It's called precision agriculture. That's just one example with a very high economic benefit. It's a data problem. How would we get those daily crop surveys? And the answer is drones.
So I think it's a great example of we're now going to be able to put, in effect, sensors in a variety of places in a dynamic way than we've ever been able to do.
Right. And when I say sky dark, everyone thinks, oh my God, over the cities, surveillance and all that kind of stuff. I think it's the last thing that's going to happen. I think it's going to be, and this is always the surprise of technology, it ends up sort of creating markets or going to markets where we don't expect it. I think the most likely, so today we associate drones with the military and Afghanistan and all that. I think in a small number of years, you're going to associate drones with what you see when you drive out into the countryside. The drones are just these sort of things that are over crops. Well, you see crop dusters already. Why not robot crop dusters?
Well, in fact, when we were working on the film Minority Report, we actually had a scene of little mini drones working for the journalists, basically drone paparazzi, if you will, who were following one of our characters in it and swarming around. The scene got cut, but that's another drone-like application that may come along.
Well, so when new technologies come out, especially general-purpose technologies, they can do anything. They can do good stuff and they can do bad stuff, and it's up to us as a society to decide what do we want. You can, on your Mac, you can write a poem or a computer virus, and Apple doesn't decide. Now, we as a society reward the poem, or perhaps not enough, and we punish the computer virus. And the same thing with drones. They can be used for lots of functions. We as a society need to decide where do we want them, where do we not want them.
So no Hellfire missiles on the drones.
Society will decide, and society may be federal, it may be local, it may be global. But ultimately, that is as technologies are deployed, we sort of try them out and we see how we feel about them. And if we feel fine about it, privacy being a fantastic example. Facebook and Salesforce are examples of companies that are using social networks. What we thought was acceptable, what we thought we were comfortable with in terms of privacy and disclosure 5 years ago is not what we think today, and is not what we will think tomorrow. So social mores and policy evolves as technology both opens up new vistas and opens up, and opens up new concerns. And I think that drones are just one of those things that we're going to have to try out, see how we feel about it, and then regulate ultimately the use rather than the technology itself.
Makes sense. Let's go over here to Google Hangouts to see if there's any questions or comments there.
Hi. Let's see. So in Makers, you talk about the empowered individual, Chris. So what does that mean for the average person? Is this something that that is really going to impact real people, or is it sort of theoretical?
So just in case you couldn't hear that question, is Chris talks about in Makers how this will impact the individual. Is this really a few people, or is this really going to transform most people's lives in one way or another?
So I think it's probably closer to the most than the few, but I need to be realistic about this. So right now, we have 3D printers at home, and my children are growing up with a 3D printer, and it is a wonderful thing. They're growing up with the knowledge that anything they can imagine, they can make real or close to it. Tomorrow, but that's not widespread. Tomorrow, the schools will have that. Those computer labs, which currently have a row of computers and 2 laser printers at the end, will have a row of computers, 2 laser printers, and 2 3D printers. And digital design will be part of the curriculum, and every student, at least hopefully every student, will get a glimpse of that possibility, and and who knows what that will do in terms of a generation of innovators. But at the same time, recognize that technology is going to get cheaper, better, faster, etc. Today, you can buy a 3D printer at Staples. Tomorrow, it may be that every 2D printer has a 3D function. That inkjet you have on your desktop is basically a 2-axis, printer that lays down, a layer of ink. But you put one more axis, one more stepper motor in there, and maybe something driving the, changing the materials, and now it's a 3D printer. Printers went from, dot matrix to laser to inkjet to high resolution multicolor inkjet, and then it was the fax machine and the copier and the scanner. Why not add 3D printer to one of the functions of a multifunction printer, and maybe use it once a year?
Well, in fact, when we were kids, if you'd said every household would have a printer, right? That just seemed, why would you have a printer at home, right? That seemed like implausible.
Well, that was implausible. What if I said every household will have a scanner?
Right.
Even more implausible. And then, and why do you need a high-resolution color printer? Does it really matter so much you're going to print out your documents with color fonts? No. And then we invented the digital camera. And it was like, oh, that's why. So we haven't yet invented the killer app of 3D printers, if you will. But what we do know is that technology is moving in a direction so it could be in every house. Now, if that were to happen, is it going to be the distributed manufacturing era, where rather my daughters don't buy dollhouse furniture, they download dollhouse furniture designs from Thingiverse, they print them out, they paint them, they scale them so they're just the right size. And so we do distributed manufacturing for dollhouse furniture. Is that going to change the world? Maybe not. What about mass customization? Maybe, maybe I don't want, the same product everybody has. I want to start with a design, a common design, and then modify it slightly for myself. Is that going to change the world? I don't know. Or maybe it's going to be that I'm creating my own stuff, not because I've become skilled in CAD, but because I'm using my phone to photocopy reality in the same way we use our digital cameras to capture the world and then print it out or modify it or distribute it. So any one of those three futures could lead to mass adoption of this technology. And if 1 out of 100 people with this desktop manufacturing capability becomes an innovator, an inventor, maybe even an entrepreneur, you're talking about a small fraction of a huge number, and that's fundamentally a 1% pivot from from consumer to creator creates an industry.
All right, that's great. So let's move on to the kind of third topic. I had the pleasure of watching the digital transformation of Wired. So when you began Wired, when you began as editor-in-chief of Wired, you didn't begin Wired, it was a print medium, right? I got, every month something was shipped to me in a big pile of paper. And I enjoyed it. I write for Wired, confession, so I liked the magazine. Having said that, at a certain point, Steve Jobs decides he's going to give us iPads. And you and the New York Times were two of the publications that Apple focused on to make the transformation to the digital world. And now I can't read the print version. I find it deadly boring. I swipe the page, hoping that something will happen, and nothing happens. I push on an image, and it's supposed to come to life, and nothing happens. It's boring. And my digital Wired is fabulous. I love it. I can't read it. And then I read other magazines, and they're kind of becoming increasingly boring. Now, it isn't that print is dead. I think it's very clear. But you created a new medium. The Wired on the iPad is not the Wired on the print. It's something else. You've created a new medium. Last night, my wife was playing with something that Chris Cox showed her the other night of a new app for the iPad, paper for painters, right? It isn't going to replace watercolors and paint. It's a new medium. Yeah. So you invented a new medium, the new magazine. What was that transition from the old print world to the new digital world like? I mean, what were you thinking about? How did it work? Are you happy with what you produced?
I have to note that there was another digital medium in between called the web.
Yeah, but it was quite different. In this
well,
case, yeah.
I would say it was much like the early days of the web. I mean, it was once again an opportunity to kind of rethink storytelling and rethink packaging and content, et cetera. And I think at the end of the day, we recognized that it was, that the problem with, web media, and there aren't many problems with web media, it's obviously doing very well, but the problem with web media was largely in sort of trying to port traditional definitions of magazine.
That's what everybody was doing, right?
Right, exactly. So it was like, whatever the web is, it was not a magazine. It was a stream rather than a periodical. It was atomized rather than packaged, and it wasn't as much about the sort of design as it was about the individual atomic unit of the story, and it was social, and maybe it mattered less about the domain, but rather than how you got to it. And so anyway, that's been a fantastic experience, and in sort of almost a kind of a organic exploration of what media of how the web changes media. What was interesting about the iPad is that it was easier to map from the print edition to the iPad edition for a couple of reasons. It was a little bit like maybe the early days of CD-ROMs, where you actually did, it is like there was a thing that you got, like a magazine, there's a thing you got, it was a CD-ROM. The CD-ROM was a carefully constructed package with a hierarchy and a flow. There's design tools were sophisticated enough that you could really, put pictures and video and typography around and all this kind of stuff. Now, the CD-ROM didn't work because of distribution things, but it was sort of like, the initial pass was, oh, this is like the CD-ROM with the fixed distribution. It's like all the sort of design tools of a CD-ROM with the distribution tools of the web. It just goes everywhere instantaneously. And so I think there was an interesting opportunity to sort of say, okay, let's think, what would we can once again ask, what would a magazine be? Magazine being a package rather than the individual units. My creative director at the time, Scott Dadich, who is now the editor of Wired, was really deserves the credit for pioneering this. And so, what we knew was a couple things. We knew that, that you had the Harry Potter effect of the static photo could be a moving photo, or maybe it could be a video, or you could have another layer rather than a two-dimensional medium. You had a kind of n-dimensional medium where things could have, layers and explode into life, etc. The graphs would be moving animations. So all that we knew that. We also knew that we could reach an audience who couldn't be reached, through mechanical, paper media. So you could, they just it would potentially appear. You could go, around the world, be on a plane, and all that kind of stuff. We also knew that there was a potential for an interactive, channel that they could talk back and that you could create communities. And we also knew that you could charge for it, which was a significant, departure from the web. That in the intervening really 20 years, where we'd gone from print to CD-ROM to web, and then ultimately that, things like e-commerce platforms had been established. Apple had built a billing relationship with customers. It was a one-click experience. All those hard things had gotten easier. Where we are today, I think, is still just at the very beginning of the experiment. Hundreds of thousands of people read, content on tablets, books, magazines, things like that. It is a rich experience. It is a richer experience than the web. People are willing to pay for it, but I think that it's still too hard. The file sizes are too large. You have an app. You have to load an app to read a magazine.
I remember when I downloaded my first issue, it was 760 megabytes, and it took all night, literally, to download it.
It's no smaller today. The Retina display, size of the Retina display doesn't help. So I think that I think it's still early days. You don't have to download an app to see a picture. You don't have to download an app to listen to music. It's built into the operating system. It just just happens. And I think that what we've started to see the way forward with books, with ebooks. At this point now,
sure.
Ebooks, readers, and app, and are now ubiquitous enough. The distribution systems are simple enough, and they cloud sync and all that, such that you have a legitimate choice between an ebook and a physical book. And and some people choose the physical book for physicality reasons, as a gift or to put on the shelf or something like that. Some people choose the ebook for convenience reasons. It makes a lot more sense than MP3 versus a CD-ROM,
right?
Or CD rather. There was really no value add to the CD, whereas there still is value add to the physical book. So I think today in the world of books, it's probably going to be 50-50, half e, half hardcover. The ebook will evolve to become a richer experience. It's not yet. It will evolve to become a more social experience. It's not as much as it could be yet, although Amazon's making strides in that step. And I think magazines will follow that path. And as print gets smaller as a portion, it'll get a richer experience. It'll be more sort of tactile, and it'll be an artifact that you value the physicality. Good. And the digital part will become even more of what you described.
Yeah, I was surprised the numbers that came out recently on the New York Times, how much of their revenue now is in the digital realm versus the print realm.
Yeah. And I think Wired's about 50-50 at this point.
So, Pablo, questions?
So I want to remind the audience to send us your questions at pound or hashtag Salesforce Live. 2 questions have come in, very interesting. The first one goes back to the previous topic, and that is, what are Chris Anderson's thoughts on moral obligations with 3D printing and guns? That's from Kevin. And then the second question is this. Chris, time after time while you were still at Wired, I heard you ask your guests, who do you look up to? So Chris, who do you look up to?
Okay, well, I answer the second one first. Sure. I have a number of kind of entrepreneurial heroes and heroes of various sorts. I mean, I have to, in full disclosure, Peter Schwartz is very high on that list, along with some of his intellectual cohort like Stuart Brand, Kevin Kelly. Entrepreneurial heroes, I mean, Elon Musk is my number one hero.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
yes.
Talk
Big
about
fan.
swing for the fences.
Really?
He's transforming space, cars, and energy with SpaceX, Tesla, and Solar City. But other entrepreneurs that also I think share those ambitions are people like Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Jeff Bezos for sure. People like Reed Hastings as well. So there's what I admire is the kind of the extraordinary ambition, the kind of don't just build a feature or build an app, change the world, or die trying, but swing for the fences. As for the earlier question about the moral obligations, I struggle with this question. I have I'm just going to cards on the table, mea culpa, I have a blind spot when it comes to words like ethics and morality. Not because I don't acknowledge that they're important, but because I don't know what our universal laws are on this, and I find myself under-equipped to make those decisions. I think society is pretty good at deciding what we collectively think of as being moral or ethical at any given point in time in any place, but those things change. And I remember that I remember as a kid hearing about test tube babies, and the debate about whether this was going against God's laws and it was going to lead to mutants, etc. And today there's a generation of kids,
millions
of
my
kids.
Son,
your son is. I wasn't gonna.
That's okay.
I wasn't gonna mention this,
but that's no secret.
Peter's son is a test tube baby. We call it in vitro fertilization now, and it's
Right.
completely normal. But 20 years ago or 25 years ago, it was considered radical and scary and probably need to be banned. Today we talk about clones as being radical and scary and probably banned. And who knows? Maybe my children's babysitter will be a clone, and we'll say,
Or
what
maybe
was
they'll clone themselves and live forever.
So back to 3D printers and guns. Yes, it is absolutely true that general purpose technologies can be used for good and for evil. And it is absolutely true that you can print a very bad gun. It's an additive technology. It's got no tensile strength. It's as likely to blow off your head as it is to do anything else. And by the way, you can buy guns in Walmart. Right? This is America. We have no shortage of guns. And if you want to make a gun, go to the hardware store and get some copper tubing. Now that is the way to make a gun. A 3D printer is like the worst way to make a gun. And by the way, the hard part is the bullet, not the barrel.
Yeah.
But all that aside, I think that that the creators of the technology have a moral obligation to engage society in a discussion about how they should be used. I don't think that you can or should censor the technology itself. We make open source drones, right? I mean, you can see that, this is something that comes up quite often in our world, and people ask, what do you do to stop bad guys from using drones? And the answer is, we're open source. What could we do? We can put lines in the code that says this cannot fly more than 1,000 feet away from you, or this cannot fly above 400 feet. It's open source code. A semicolon will comment out that line, and poof, there goes our controls. So what do we do? What we do is we push things into the public. We do things in community, and we sort of say, look, here's the technology. Let's all use it collectively. Let's watch what we're doing, and let's collectively watch out for bad behavior. So we invite the FBI into our community, and we say, and we have told the FBI and told our community, when we see people behaving badly, we will pick up the phone and call the FBI. We will inform regulators about what's being done because it's their job to protect us. It's our job to create general purpose technologies. It's our job to push things into the public. It's our job to try to promulgate responsible use, but it's also our job to help the regulators and law enforcement do their job better. That's about where I draw the line.
Okay, let's go over here to Google Hangouts and see if there's a comment or question from here.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Burnham. I have a question just about, Google I/O. They just had their developer conference this week. They're continually coming out with these utilities like a better search, better Google Hangouts, and then Google Glasses. I'm just curious your thoughts about, is Google the new Apple? Do we need a company like that to facilitate bringing some of this technology to market and making it more consumer facing? And then second part to my question, because I work in social media, is Google Plus ever going to become that hot social network? Yeah. I couldn't resist.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. You probably have some thoughts on this as well. I'm a huge Google fan. It's just, I don't know. In every era, there's this one company that one is emotionally drawn to, and I just sort of think that the way, starting from Larry and Sergey and down throughout the company, that their initial founding idea of PageRank and this sort of the statistical approach at understanding society was profound. It's kind of a century-long discovery. I mean, I think it's up there with like, I don't know, maybe not Darwin, but it's up there. And I think that their ambition, to me, autonomous cars are as important as the next search algorithm. Their emphasis on energy. Google X, which is the division that Sergey runs, is in many ways as important as Google itself. And Google Glasses is, again, it's an example of what that Moore's law of sensors, allows. I will probably never wear Google Glasses. It's just, I have
on
one.
the day I see you in them, I'll remind you.
I think that's probably not going to be the exact form factor I want. I don't have, among other things, I don't wear glasses. But You know, the idea of a, you know, I am obviously wearing gadgets on myself, and they are recording, you know, my life. You know, I think the idea of, you know, of gathering more data about things that are important to you is a good one. And I also think that glanceable displays or alternative displays on your phone are a good one. Whether glasses are it, or whether it's going to be something on my wrist, or, you know, some smarter watch or something like that, I'm not sure. But what I applaud most about Google's approach is just they take the biggest picture and the longest view of almost any company I know. And
yeah, I share that. I mean, I have that same sense of enthusiasm, and you feel it around there, frankly. I mean, you remember, Pablo, when we were down at Google one day, and we happened to run into Sergey, you know, we both know, and there he was, about to go out for a sort of bike ride on a weird new kind of bike he was turned on to, dressed in his biking clothes and Google glasses, heading out and hanging out with his workers. They really do want to change the future. They are very ambitious. And they're good at it. I mean, it isn't like, you know, that this is all air. They actually keep doing the things they say they're going to do.
And, you know, for my money, I think the autonomous cars is more important than, you know, than Google Glasses. You know, as I always say, you know, the whole problem with texting and driving is the driving part.
Right. Well, in fact, you know, again, when we worked on Minority Report, we showed autonomous cars 50 years in the future. And the truth is, when we did it, now almost 10 years ago, I thought it was 50 years in the future. And Google has brought it, maybe it's not now, but it's not 50 years, it's maybe 10 years.
Humans should not operate heavy machinery drunk or not. You know, we're taking pilots out of cockpits, and Google's taking drivers out behind the wheel. And as for Google Plus, I'm a big fan of Google Plus. I use it a lot, but we use it internally as, you know, as part of our collaboration environment. What I like about it is that, you know, I'm not smart enough to be clever in 140 characters. I use Twitter a lot, but the reality is that I'm intimidated.
You do okay. Hey, listen, I'm amazed that anybody can communicate anything worth it, and everybody does it now. I'm amazed.
They do indeed, but I do feel that's not my natural voice. And what I like about Google Plus is that I haven't, you know, as Mark Twain said, I'm sorry for writing a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one.
Well, we've seen this morning, long answers are actually your forte.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay. No.
I'll reform.
No. I don't want you to stop. But I take your point. And I think, I do think that the autonomous car is a big deal. I share that. And I think it's one of those things that will be a big early surprise. You know, that we will be surprised and what the consequence of it in terms of road safety, efficiency, all those kinds of things. Well, we're sort of beginning to get to the end here. Let's take one more round of questions from our social media and from Google Hangouts. But let's go over to Pablo first.
Sure. So one last question that I just received is, Chris, what advice would you give an audience members who don't have a background in technology, who want to join sort of this technology revolution?
You know, there has never been an easier time to participate. You know, I run a drone company, and, you know, I don't know anything about any of this technology. I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about electronics, about the software, about the aeronautics, any of that kind of stuff. The stuff was so easy that I could just sort of dabble a little bit, and then people quickly made me smarter. You know, I would say my homework assignment for anybody in this audience who, especially those who have kids, is, you know, remember when you were a kid and your parents got a home computer. They weren't sure why. It probably cost about $2,500, and it's like, yeah, I think it's probably important for education, and you can program it. But, you know, we quickly figured out what they were for. Now, maybe video games was the answer, but the point is that, you know, it transformed our lives. You know, growing up with a computer opened yourself up to what that tool could do. And I would suggest that, especially people who have kids at home, consider that this is the year they get a 3D printer. My kids are growing up with a 3D printer, and it's changing their lives. I think schools will have 3D printers. They're about starting about $1,000 right now. You can buy them in Staples. The 3D Systems Cube is a good example. They're cute. They're easy. They are, I think, you know, what the home computer was 20 years ago, and you know, you don't need any skills whatsoever. Get one, play around with it. If that doesn't suggest, you know, some ideas, I don't know what would.
Okay, great answer. Let's go over here to Google Hangouts.
Hi, this is Nuria. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Great discussion so far, Chris. And my question to you is, do you have any regrets, or have you made any mistakes that you wish you didn't career-wise?
Wow. regrets, mistakes, etc. No, I've never made a mistake. Oh my God, so many. Where do I start? You know, the one my parents, my mother actually reminds me of all the time is the time I told her to sell Apple and buy HP. And so she put a significant fraction of her nest egg into that investment decision. That didn't work out so well.
Your history as a punk rocker?
My history as a punk rocker was the best thing ever. I failed out of college and I ended up being a punk rocker. And it was like the early '80s. And it was the beginnings of the DIY scene. You know, it wasn't MP3s, it was TIAC 4-track tape recorders. It wasn't, you know, the internet. It was, you know, vinyl presses that were due 7 inches. It wasn't, you know, blogs. It was the photocopier and zines. But that sort of bottoms-up music industry that the punk rock movement in the '80s created became, for me, the template for the web, and it's basically informed everything I've done since. So, you know, if you want to know where I got my kind of power to the people DIY bottoms-up thing, it was being a bicycle messenger and playing in punk rock bands in Washington, D.C. in the '80s.
Well, now, we've seen many covers of Wired magazine, right? So, you know, where
I read about a third of them.
Yeah, right. So I can remember. Any of those that you look back and say, that wasn't quite it?
God. I mean, more than a third. I mean, you know, so covers of magazines are a particularly tough thing because you need to take a great cover is a big idea compellingly reduced into a compelling image. You know, so ideas not enough. Simply, it's often you need to attach an idea to a person. So we've had great ideas without a person, and we've had great people without an idea. And you know, most of the failures are somewhere one of those. We just couldn't turn into an image, and a compelling person who just didn't have that much behind them. It just was kind of a disappointing, you know, read. And you know, I would always err on the side of the idea rather than the person. But there was a period when we had about sort of like, you know, out of 12 issues, we had about 10 middle-aged white guys with beards. And that was not my proudest
moment. You mean like me?
You know, as great as you are, you may not be the perfect magazine cover.
Well, look, this has been great. It's always a pleasure, just as a friend. This is the kind of conversation we have every weekend over tennis, I got to say. So I'm very fortunate to have Chris as a friend and colleague and neighbor. But I think it's very clear to all of you, you know, when we talk about ideas that are shaping the future, there are very, very few people who exemplify that and embody that spirit of the ideas that are shaping the future than Chris Anderson. His books, his companies, his magazines. I think he's going to be around for a long time shaping those ideas, and it's a real pleasure. And to have him as our first guest, I think sets the bar very high for everybody else. Chris is incredibly articulate, and those ideas are incredibly powerful. I hope you'll join us again in the future. We'll be back in roughly a month with Steve Johnson and Peer Power. And this show will be available on the web, so you can tune in and watch it or share it with your friends and enjoy the pleasure of the company of Chris Anderson again. Thank you all very much.